Hi, what I want to talk about here now is teaching of sport. We're going to break it up into the different principles of teaching of sport, and then we'll get into technical skills, and then finish up with a plan for teaching that you're going to need to do on your portfolio. So right away, here's a section you're going to have on the final portfolio. You need to address your seasonal plan. It can be a full calendar schedule type model, or it can be what we'll show you at the end. Another way to do it is just do a snapshot for a week. Second one then you've got to address is a daily plan and an actual practice schedule. And I'll show you that at the end of the lecture here then too. That's where those templates come in. Those actual practice schedules serve as illustrations in the TRI. All right, so some principles of teaching a sport. Get into definitions, technical, tactical, concept, holistic approach, and then finish up with talking about games approach versus traditional. So some skills, some things defined here right at the beginning. Skill is just executing the techniques required for that sport. It's using the techniques, and then we'll get into tactics, which is decision making. And then lastly, conceptual teaching. It's a kind of a whole concept of the movement or the big picture. It empowers athletes to be part of the decision making, which is one of the important components of it. And again, we start to understand what everyone and everything around us is doing. So technical skills, again, it's a specific procedures to move one's body to perform the task that needs to be accomplished. This can be done a lot of different ways. This is a short video of my two girls, Nella and Sylvie. They're very different people. Can do different techniques to cross the river here. So you can click on the video down here if you stop, look at the PowerPoint. But Nella, who's on the far bank, will use a ballet technique. And Sylvie, who's on the rock, will use what we call a rock and roll technique. Both get the job done. The neat thing about this is, and we'll talk about it, is it is kind of what we do here. It's a games approach, kind of free play. So stop the video here quick. Click on the PowerPoint, and you'll get a good laugh for just a quick minute. Now, getting back to technical skills, or tactical skills then, this is the difference between technique and tactical. Tactical is the decision making or actions that players need to make or athletes need to make. We're not talking about the strategy here of the game, but we're talking more about what people call the game sense, and it's the decision making that's needed in your sport. The reason this is so important is research shows now that athletes need 80% of their practice or preparation needs to be on tactical skill development, decision making, because the environment, the movements, everything that's happening around them is changing all the time. Traditionally, it used to be just the opposite. It used to be heavy technique work and then some tactical. So concept teaching, again, we're talking about big picture, know what others are doing around you. What's nice about this is once you start to understand what's going on around you, it enables and empowers and lets the athlete have some ownership in this. So that's where we want to use what's called a holistic approach, where we'll do the whole picture so you can see it. Probably don't understand it very well, but we'll break it down into the techniques that are needed, the parts, and then we'll come back and do that whole teaching so you can start making some quality decisions or tactical skill development. Holistic approach then, some examples like that. The first thing you need to do is just look at the terminology you're using, or keywords. Good example is when I do consultant work, I help with the 9th grade in the high school here in State College with football. You can assume that these athletes just know what are common sense or common football terms. So you have to go ahead and explain those, like cutting back or spacing or stretching. So you want to help focus on that and let them learn that. Then when you make decisions, they can make quality decisions by understanding what those are. The other thing we want to look at doing in our teaching in the holistic approach is you're going to combine the technical and tactical so that it all comes together. So the holistic or concept teaching actually helps enable the athlete to be part of the process. And then again, it gets into if you're interested in being a transformational coach, where you empower them to be part of the process too. So a neat research note here is it's been shown that athletes need 24 successful rehearsals before they start to actually master a skill or it starts to stick in that decision making or in their motor learning. So 2 examples I give from football, this is all the time, is coaches tell athletes to quarterbacks to throw the football out of bounds when there's a pass rush so they don't get sacked. The problem is we don't think of having to practice that or get those 24 successful rehearsals. So you actually have to have your athletes, again, throw the football out of bounds in practice, in game situations. The argument would be 24 times before they're going to do that in a competitive environment. The second one is a play it's a good example. It's simple, it's fun, it's easy. I use it at every time I install things offensively or camps. It's just called 4 verticals, and I'll show you this. But it's just what it says. You're going to have the four receivers going just vertically up the field, and then you've got a running back checking down. So again, let's think you're going to complete 50% of those passes. That means, just going to round up, we've got to go, to get that 24 rehearsals, we're going to do 25 completions. That means we're going to do 50 attempts to each of those 5 receivers. That means you're going to have to do this one play 250 times. So the key here is you've got to be able to think about your sport, what's important, and how you can empower them. But the key component is they need reps. So here's an example of that 4 Verts pass play. You can see the 4 receivers going vertical, the running back checking down. So again, the quarterback is going to be able to, you can do the techniques individually and work this. But again, to start getting the tactical and decision making done, and for this to stick for this quarterback, to the possibility of throwing it to all 5 receivers, that's going to be 50 times, 250 times we're going to throw that one play. Whole part whole, again, you want to be able to teach these techniques. Whole is just the big picture. So again, you want to think about in your preseason plan of teaching, what are some things you need to install and do, and then what would be the order of that. The details then is when we get into that technique pieces. So now you want to look at fundamentals, and then you want to go back to big picture. How can we combine this into a games approach? Good example of a couple of those are we want to make sure we're doing competition is good versus good. You want to match the abilities, so it's challenging. And then situational, real simple, is you want to create those game-like situations. That's the games approach. So that's what we're talking about. What most programs have done or maybe experienced, especially in team sports, is you're just going to do that traditional approach, work the techniques, get that down, but you're not going to do a lot of it in a competitive or decision-making environment. Games approach is talking about doing more of that integrated, and the argument is actually 80% of the time that needs to be done. So again, games approach emphasizes learning through the game-like practice and activities, creates realistic situation, and if you think about it, if you're doing games type environment situations, it's fun for the athletes, it's fun for you. And this is the last argument I make for consulting, is you as a coach need to actually have gain experience and practice the decision making you need to make if you're involved in your sport doing that. When we get into technical skills, let's break it down. A couple of things here. We'll look at the 3 stages of learning and then how you can teach those technical skills. So again, we talked about this right at the beginning. We would argue that coaching is teaching, and then learning is a relatively permanent improvement in the performance as a result of practice. So again, we know that's learning's happening when we see some permanent improvement in practice. That's what we've got to find. The old theory was we'd get these mental blueprints. Again, you do the motor learning skills, it would just get a blueprint in your body just by doing repetitions, practice over and over. But now the problem is we found out that changes all the time. The environment, the athlete situation. So we've got to create those different tactical environments. So the new learning theory, again, is about developing rules. What you're doing when you're teaching technique is you want to make sure that you keep giving them tools to get new rules as they perform and get better. Okay? And that brain type goes through 4 types of processing the information. It's the condition of the environment, the demands of the movement, speed, direction, force, the consequences as they're perceived. It's how the athlete feels before, during, and after. And then last, how well they're performing information. That's where you need to give some feedback, and we'll talk about what is the balance in that. Last one, motor programs. Again, in kinesiology, this is something we should all know. It's just that generalized movement, but it's those complex rules put together to produce a movement. So again, your responsibility is try to develop good motor programs. Or another way to think about that is the fundamentals you're giving them in their techniques. So again, it's how you teach the technique, you shape it, and then we'll talk about how you can focus their attention. So the 3 stages of learning. There's the mental stage. What we want to do here in the mental stage is you don't want to overload it. So what I'm looking for you to do when you do your teaching plan is a way you can start with single skills and then actually build or scaffold them, just like we're trying to do with each assignment here, scaffolds to the final portfolio. The practice stage, again, you want not just quantity of the practice, but it needs to be quality. So a term I use all the time in teaching is slow to fast. Athletes want to start super fast, and we actually want them to start slow and build to that so that they're under control. Quality before you get into the quantity. And then automatic stage is eventually you don't have to do anything. The athlete naturally is combining all of those together for a quality technique. So, teaching technical skills. Step 1, you want to introduce it, obviously. The key here is getting their attention, making sure everybody can hear you. And then this is where the cue words come in. It's a great way to use the cue word for the technique you're trying to have them do is actually the name of the drill. So a good one would be is quarterback, for example. If we want him to throw the football where he's coming with the elbow straight and up over the top, cue word we use is just dart, throwing a dart. So this would be dart drill, where we're focusing on that technique. When we demonstrate the skill and explain it, those cue words you can see are powerful, but obviously videos a great technique in this day and age. You want to relate the techniques that previously learned, so they should actually build on each other. And then the last one is check for understanding. Do this all the time in the practice plan is if we do something, some teaching for 5 minutes, we're going to actually, with a 5-minute period, we're going to finish with 30 seconds to a minute left and just ask them to repeat those cue words to make sure they have an understanding. Step 3, you want to have them practice the technical skills. So you break it into the parts like we did before, break it down. Find different points in the movement where there's left and interdependence. Okay, so a good example, let's go back to the football throw. We always talk about ready position with the ball, moving the ball up to the ear, and then the dart. You can see now when we're doing one fluid motion, we want to be able to put the 3 together. Again, there's usually a preparation, action, and follow through. So again, preparation, action, follow through. Right there's another example. You can break it down that way. Again, practice each part in a natural progression and then concentrate only on one area. So as we're doing those 3 parts together, the movement of the throw, you don't want to have to focus and teach communicating all 3 of them. Pick one, and then once that's mastered, go to the next one. Correcting the errors, just again, you're looking to observe and evaluate that and provide feedback. Again, the mistake here is too much feedback, but also too much negative feedback. Again, we're motivated by positive improvements that we can gain in our learning. So, practice some better practice principles. Again, the right techniques. You got to talk about this all the time in consulting. If it's being done wrong, we would be better off not even practicing, okay? Because then you've got to correct that. Number 2, technique in game-like conditions as much as you can. Again, for that decision or tactical skill development. Practice is short and frequent when teaching new techniques. Real simple. You want to be able to go a couple minutes and then move on because we'll lose the focus. Use your practice time efficiently. We've all been in those situations where coach says we're going to do this for 5 minutes and it turns into a marathon, okay? You want to avoid that. Make optimal use of the facilities and equipment. That's just preparation. Make sure your athletes are experiencing success. That's huge. You want to set them up for success. Again, look at where they are in their skill development. And then try to make practice fun. This is great. Pause here on the video and go to the PowerPoint. It's just 5 minutes. Soccer does a great job though, and Doug Williamson does in this video of using technical and tactical applications in small-sided games. All right, Going on to technical skills, we're going to talk about what's called the tactical triangle, reading the situation, some knowledge to it, decision making, and then teaching those technical skills or tactical skills. So first, tactics, it's a plan to gain advantage, but we're talking about games approach here, so it's greater emphasis on developing tactical skills while you're in a game environment, because that's why there's that 80% focus now. Again, the reason is a series of problems need to be solved by your players all the time. So the tactical triangle is reading it, acquiring the knowledge for it, and then applying that decision making. So reading the situation, again, they need to be able to recognize on their own what the problems are. So you have to actually teach that almost like a classroom situation before you go out on the field. Again, cognitive skills of perception. It's about now being able to make sure they can have the attention and concentration on what they're doing. Perception, to recognize and then actually understand what they're doing, how to make what they're feeling, and how to make corrections. And that's the attention to that stimuli. And then last is, again, having that ability to concentrate on the one thing you're trying to focus towards. So how can we improve the attention and concentration? Number one, just minimize distractions. That can be as simple as this is what I talked about, finding the balance of not giving them too much feedback or talk. Okay, your athletes know their identity. Okay, some people just need a lot of feedback and need a lot of attention. Others don't need any at all. You need to look at your pre-event routines. Okay, again, it gets into that mental preparation. Good argument is with shooting free throws, for example. Research shows that the routine of shooting a free throw, since there's no real decision making made in there, is as important as the skill development and being successful. Again, this is where you get into this empowerment and enablement and the athlete involved in the process. They should be able to analyze their own play when there's a break and start to know how to coach themselves up. You want to make sure they focus on the situation and their performance. So again, it gets at single versus multiple skills. You can do the same thing in feedback or what you're focusing on improving, and then help them develop not just physical but mental skills that meet the demands in your sport. So technical knowledge here, when we're talking as the sport, rules, strategy, playing conditions, self-knowledge, tactical options. What we're talking about here is really the decision making that your athletes need to be able to do when they're in a competitive environment. So one, teach the tactics as a whole, then break it into the parts. So just like you did with technique, do the same thing with tactics. Have them observe others doing this and doing it well or doing it poorly. Talk about this all the time when I'm working with high schoolers, is that it's like watching a live video when you watch other people perform, and if you're analyzing it yourself. Again, video, watching and analyzing yourself with video. Simulating real game-like conditions gets back to that games approach. The good thing here is you want to think about this, is if you have a good start and set up a really good plan in your practice plan so they have success, know how to do it in a routine, and then you have a good finish, usually what happens in the middle is forgotten, and we can actually have some great learning happening. Control the feedback, paralysis by analysis. I always tell the story when I was a young coach with football in college. I do a thing called 7-on-7 where you're just passing against the defensive backs and the receivers. No linemen in there. And I would give all this feedback all the time. I was giving way too much. And Zim, who was a running back, finally came over to me one time and he goes, "Hey, it's just too much. It's like my mom telling me to clean up my room over and over. I just throw more stuff out." And I start not listening to anything. So what we did is we would go 5-10 minutes where I wouldn't say anything, and then they would come over and ask questions. And it actually showed me how effective you can be in being able to create opportunities to empower and enable your athletes to be in the tactical decision making. Again, control the feedback, like I said, and then last, ask questions. That's where that all comes in and ties in together. So again, pause the video lecture here, and this is another 5-minute video. Again, the small-sided games, and it talks about inspiring tactical creativity into your practice plans. Last then, taking all this information now that we've dissected actual teaching in sport, is coming up with a plan. So identifying those skills, knowing your athletes, analyzing, establishing some priorities, your selection of your teaching methods, and then planning your practices. That's what you're going to do for your portfolio. So 1, identify the skills needed. What you want to do here is just look at in your preseason routine, into your in-season and your off-season. There's different skills that your athletes need to focus on. Make checklists. When I was coaching in college, we simply had, during the first week of each of those sessions, we made sure we went through and were able to check those all off at every position. You should have some technical and tactical lists, break them into that. You want to look at same thing doing with your physical and your mental preparation. Good way is just to look at creating some goals at the start there. Focus on what keywords you're using, so you have quality communication and efficient communication. And then the last thing is you can actually do ethics and character skill development. Good example is, I've always used, is trying to create self-discipline. So when you're doing running or something, this is typical, you start on a line. If you look at 30 athletes, there's going to be about half of them that are either on the line or over the line, and you've told them to start behind the line. So it's as simple as making sure that happens, or having them identify and police themselves with it. Know your athletes, what to evaluate, essential skills again, like we said, and talking about the safety in your teaching. How to evaluate, this is just real simple. It gets into the evaluation section you're going to talk about. Almost every sport, either individually or as a team, you should have some pre and post period evaluations. That shows you if the improvement's happening or not happening. Again, that gets into that assessment. And the reason is when you get into what I call live bullets, everything changes. Meaning, going from a practice environment, especially just working on the technique, someone can be great at it, but then you put this into a competitive environment, the speed of the game's increased, the mental awareness or stress has increased, and now all of a sudden, all that technique can go out the door. So we've got to make sure that we evaluate in game situations, games approach. Analyzing your situation, it's real simple here. With the portfolio, you need to do everything into preseason, in-season, off-season, because those are different, and that's where there needs to be constant and consistent evaluation. Quality control methods, real simple. Quality control is just taking things to assess and see if what you want to have accomplished is actually being accomplished. Another thing that's happened is quality control can be what they call analytics today, is you're going to take key statistics that will tell you if you're accomplishing these statistics, most likely your team or that individual can be successful in your sport. Then think of the times best to review it, how much you want to review, and how much then you want to change. The big thing here is, in every sport, with every skill you're asking your athletes to do, there are core concepts or fundamental things you need to do. You want to identify what those are and hang your hat on that. And the key is trying to make those things stick. And what I mean by stay the course is, inevitably during a competitive season, things will go, you'll get off the course there, meaning things will be negative, and it'll be easy to change and think you've got to change those core concepts. If you identified what they are and done your research, you'll realize the best thing to do is just stay the course, and eventually you're going to get your athletes as well as your team back to accomplishing those at a high level. Again, establish priorities. So this is where I'm talked before. Research your sport. Use new information. We really, again, when I do consulting, I see coaches just coaching the way they were coached, and that could have been 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago. There's some good components there, but the sport and the culture evolves and changes. You need to do so. So that's where you can adjust, but still stick to your core. Another one I love to say is less is more. Don't overthink it. We can get too creative in the process or too cute. And again, the 4 vertical pass play is a great example. That's as simple as it gets. You run straight down the field. I've had third graders do that, and there's no problem understanding it. But you can see in football, research shows now, is the team that has the most explosive plays without turning the ball over is going to win over 92% of the time. So it's a simple way of being able to keep less is more. Just do those 250 reps on that, right? There's no magic plays. Also, when you get into these more individual or technique-heavy sports, let's say swimming, for example, or track and field, let's say we're doing the pole vault or shot put, you're not competing against an opponent, you need to make sure that there's no magic techniques. There's certain things the science shows you need to be able to do, and you need to be able to get your athletes to do that at the best of their ability. So fundamentals and core concepts, and stick to your priorities. Make that plan, do your research, be organized, and then all of a sudden you've done everything you can do for your athletes. Step 5, select the methods of teaching. You can do whatever you want in the portfolio. It does not have to be games approach. But again, you can be heavy traditional. The argument would be there is a place for both. And then what I'm looking for you to do is connect it to your leadership style and your philosophy, and then think about how much control do you need versus empowerment in the process. Real simple. If we look at what we talked about, the 4 stages that a team's going to be in: forming, storming, norming, and then performing. We need to think the traditional maybe is better in those forming and storming phases, and then when we're in the norming and performing, we can obviously more of a games approach. Step 6, plan your practices. That's what I need you to do with your portfolio, and the reason we're doing that is, again, you got some organization, there's a process in place, you've done your research, document it, then there can be real teaching, real managing, real leading. I can't tell you the number of times I go do consultant work, go to practices, go to camps, and we're seeing leaders, coaches, teachers going out without a plan, without preparation. The people that suffer in that when you forget something are the athletes. So the practice plan is nothing other than preparation, having a plan, but also then having a cheat sheet. This is a great video. Please pause here, go to the PowerPoint. Eddie Reese, he's the swim coach at the University of Texas, works with Olympic athletes, arguably the best swim coach in the world, and he just has a great model or a great example of a technique-focused sport, being able to combine some of these practice plans and methods. So with your practice lesson plan design, you've got to do a daily lesson plan. It's a 1-page template. It's on Canvassing. Go to those organizational templates in the first week and think of what I'm looking for is some part of it needs to be games approach, some concept teaching, and looking for technical and tactical skill development. Again, you'll use this on your final portfolio. So here's an example of the daily practice plan or the template. Again, you can use this. It's in Word docs, so you can cut it up however you want also, and then just fill in the spaces. You can see where you can address everything with that. If you want to make up your own or do something different, that's fine too, but I wanted to give you a visual on what I'm talking about. That's the daily one. When we get into seasonal, you can do a calendar format if you want. Another way to do that is simply do a weekly where there's a snapshot. This works really well for sports where there's a contest once a week or twice a week, or the routine stays pretty common there. So what we have then is 6 areas you need to identify that we've talked about. Your daily focus, kind of your approach, traditional versus games, how you're going to do that, some of the skills you need, both technical and tactical. And then you talk your methods and your learning, and you can kind of adjust this as you go. So here would be that template. Again, that's on those organizational templates. You can use this in your portfolio, and this is just, you'll talk about, again, your season-long practice plan. That would be the thesis statement. So you need to give an overall description first, a reference then to support that, and then filling this in. And again, in that thesis statement, you would explain the template a little bit. Then you're going to fill in these areas addressing daily focus, traditional or games, skill, mental, physical, technical, tactical, evaluation, and learning and teaching methods. Again, that could progress differently. We're doing a 5-day practice week with a game day on Saturday and then Sunday off, okay? If your sport works for that. All right, hopefully that's given you a great understanding of some of the terminology, the different techniques, and some of the new research, and then lastly, how to apply it to your daily plan along with your seasonal plan that you'll need to do on your portfolio. Thanks.